This is not live, I hope, right?
Hi, I'm Vlad Bresnix, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Bresnixcast. My guest in this episode is Yann Faussurier. Now, you may know Yann from the industrial breakcore project Iszoloscope. He's also a part of the tribal tinged industrial powerhouse that is Ivardensphere, and he makes some excellent sci-fi inspired dance music with Memmaker. Yann's made and contributed to a lot of great music, and we had a great conversation, so here it is. Okay, so I'm here with Yann Faussurier. If I'm doing the pronunciation right. Yann, first off, thanks so much for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, absolutely. So why don't we I like to start at the beginning with all these things. So, Yann, why don't you start by telling us kind of how you got into music in the first place? I know, it could be a big question, but give me the highlights.
The highlights. Well, I guess it was the end of high school, maybe the last 2 years of high school, I started to get into music. Mm-hmm. I was really into visual arts. And I had everything I was exposed to as far as music goes was, I think the best way to describe it was aggressively mediocre. So I really grew up in a suburb of in Canada that basically had I want to say absolutely no culture, but again, aggressively absolutely no culture. So everything I was exposed to as a child was it was pretty terrible. The only way I found to dodge that, the only thing that got me interested was really visual arts. Simply, I think because it was easily accessible, and frankly, people that were really into music, I had nothing to, like, they didn't want to have anything to do with me, and I had nothing to do with them anyways, so. And then in a visual art class, one of my friends there made me listen to something he was listening to, and it was the album Comprendido Time Stops from Nepal. Mm-hmm. And that was completely different from anything I've ever heard. The structure was there was no structure as far as verse, chorus, or any. Basically, all my references to music were out of the window, and the focus was entirely into the mood and the texture, which is something I've never heard before. And then that opened a lot of doors. I just wanted more of that. And 2 years later, I was completely done with visual arts. And I went 100% into that. I was really into interesting textures and unusual sounds. I'm really into dark ambient, some trip hop, some industrial, of course, especially with what's considered industrial at the time, Pigface, some Skinny Puppy, of course. I'm forgetting a whole bunch. I need to go through my my library. But yeah, massively, so a few bands like Exorcist, Numb. I was crazy about Numb also. Late 90s, what was going on in the late 90s, and that was available in Canada at the time. Also got really into Coil for exactly the same reason. And, just, Dead Horses on Air. Anything that was really unusually structured and used sounds that were non-musical is really what I went for.
And that's interesting. I was kind of had the same thing. That I remember the first time I started listening to things like it was Coil and Nurse with Wound and stuff like that, and I just never heard anything like it. And I was just like, "You can do this," you know?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly. I had the only introduction I had to music was really through my music teachers, who were just terrible.
Mine too.
I think they were terrible people to begin with, so I don't use that lightly. So my introduction to music was just was a big whatever, and the music they introduced us to was absolutely foul and wow, just bad. And whatever was playing on the radio, I found annoying, and I found more annoying the music fans, than the actual music. That's basically it.
I guess I know what you mean. That's quite interesting. So then how do you make the jump to start making your own music from that point of suddenly hearing this kind of new stuff and your eyes sort of being open to something totally different?
When I was in my late teens, I naively thought that the only reason everybody was not listening to this kind of music is because they were not exposed to it. So I made it a point to just share as much as I could. And a friend of mine and I we decided to go to the local university and ask for a radio time slot. And behold, we had the time slot, and we had enough CDs to have a consistently changing radio show for the years to come, actually. And the radio station also had a very interesting collection of unusual albums, I would say, non-musical stuff, experimental music, which was a thing. Of course, this was way before MP3s were a thing. We had a radio show. We had a radio show for 2 or 3 years, I think. And to that radio show, I got introduced to everybody that was doing some anything that was experimental going on in my hometown, Ottawa. Well, Ottawa's not my hometown. I came from a suburb of Ottawa. It was pretty much in the boonies, but Ottawa was a big city back then for me, which is not very impressive if you've ever been there. But it was still a really thriving community of artists going on there, and everybody was really motivated. And so I ended up playing everybody that was locals. Not just me. Well, my buddy and I, we played music that was basically homegrown and all that stuff mixed together. So we got to know everybody that was involved. And one thing came to the other. We started to make our own bridges for the radio show. And we started to fiddle around. My friend was really into not guitar composition, but just guitar noise music. So one time we went to a music store. I just came along with him, and there was a Juno 106 sitting on a bass amp, and I just played with it for a minute, and that bass amp was as loud as it could be. And after just 2 minutes of playing with it, I decided I wanted to make music too. I just didn't think it was a thing for me anyways. I thought it was more for the social, not the social aspect, but just the experience aspect of music. But then I realized that I was maybe interested in making my own with my friend. And so we did some bridges ourselves for the radio show. And within a year we had a few demos that were just sitting around. And that's basically it. That's how I started.
It just kind of took off from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And then I never stopped.
Once you get the bug, you're stuck with it.
Yeah, basically.
Well then, what kind of equipment did you use in the early days, and then how has that kind of changed over the years?
I bought a Juno 106 because I wanted that thing. And I had a computer. At the time, very little people were using computers. We're still talking about 98. People that were using computers was more for tracking and high-end systems to do sound editing. I went to the local music store, and the salesperson there introduced me to pro equipment for a computer. He got me to buy a professional sounding sound card, which basically changed a lot of things. I had ASO drivers. At the time, it was also a big deal. On a Windows machine, it was suddenly I could do pro stuff on a PC that I built. I was using Wavelab and SoundForge Acid. It was bought by Sony later, but at the time it was mostly Acid. Acid allowed me to take recordings and just arrange them in a track, and it was very added a very interesting way to doing. You could actually draw a track based on the recordings you made, which no other programs did at the time. All the other programs were mostly based on notation and some sampling sometimes, but this was entirely like it had more in common with tape cutting, I think, than anything else. And just by virtue of that, I was able to start working really quickly and very efficiently with my computer, since I was a computer person to begin with, anyways, more than a practical musician, per se. So
yeah, it's funny because I mean, not to start anything, but with some people, I mean, I've got no issue with the computer thing. I use it myself, but like, there's some people who, it's funny, I don't know, there's some people who get all kind of, still even these days, kind of puritanical about someone playing live with a computer, which I just kind of, I don't understand it at all.
I play live with a computer, but that being said, I think everybody has their own process, so I'm not even, I have like zero judgment on how anybody makes their show, basically. Like, I don't even have an opinion about it.
Alright, that was funny you mentioned your process, because that's what I was going to kind of come to, because I was going to ask, like, I mean, how has your process changed from, like, you know, like, as sort of you've changed, you've grown more knowledge over the years and things like that, has it become different, or have, like, elements stayed the same?
I don't know, like, I guess I still have the experimental, I still like to experiment with sound first. That's just what I do. I just play with sound, and then when I get something I like, I can build a track around it. That's never changed. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I play with sounds, and then I can build a track around sounds. What's changed is, of course, the technical know-how, both compositionally and production-wise. I got really obsessed with production also. When I started to get more serious about it, it just opened a door that I didn't understand existed. And when I get introduced to something that's completely new to me, if I'm interested, there's no, like, I just devour it. And that's what happened also.
Yeah, cool. So I was going to ask as well, like, I saw on your website that you'd said, like, I believe the quote was, you're casting the musical conceptualization of isolation and its induced altered states of consciousness. So we could kind of take that in two bits. So if we start with, like, the concept of isolation, how is that important to your music, and how do you think it comes out through your music?
It's more like a one-man exploring sound, really. The world stops existing when I do that. That's what I find. Even when I work with other people, their input is there, but it's still something really, really solitary to do. And it's been a while that I've thought about it, actually.
Yeah.
No, but that's. I think it's at this point in my life, it's more the aesthetics of it. Like, I want things to sound more. It's interesting. This is something that was easy for me to explain maybe 10 years ago, and really easily. But now it's been so long since anybody asked me about it that it's just, I've synthesized it to a point where you're asking me to how do I walk, basically, you know. So.
It's something that's so much a part of you, it's hard to kind of, like, conceptualize it.
Yeah, and I haven't had to put into word in, like, almost a decade, I think. I need to rebuild that whole circuitry in my head to make it work.
That's cool, yeah, I know what you mean. So, let's talk about Memmaker. Now, how did you first start getting involved with Memmaker?
It was late 2008. Well, basically, Guillaume was... I moved to Montreal at that point. I was not longer in Ottawa. And I bumped into Guillaume a few times. Kind of person I got along with immediately. He was DJing. He was also in Memmaker at that point. It was his solo project, and he had a few songs. He was giving CDs away of, like, check out what I'm doing. And I just remember that he had some great ideas. Like, he had 5 tracks on a demo that he was giving away. I remember that. And all of those tracks were like there's no crap on it. It was great. But production was so terrible, and he used a lot of distortions, and he did rookie. As far as I was concerned, these were rookie mistakes for using distortion. And but composition wise, like the melodies, the arrangements, like, wow, it was amazing. I thought it was absolutely amazing, and that was something I was not into back then. I absolutely did not understand compositional music. I was so focused entirely on texture. So I don't remember exactly how it happened. I'm sure Guillaume does. He does remember these, but it probably included me being really drunk. I remember telling him, like, I remember asking him, do you want me to work with you with Memmaker? I'd like to work with Memmaker. I'd like to do now, whatever. I meant, let's Memmaker together.
Why don't we Memmaker?
So yeah, like, we started working almost immediately, and like, we just went through everything he had, like all the little project files he had, and we just went right through it. In 8 months, we had the album done. And these were tracks that he was sitting on for years, honestly, and he just couldn't finish them simply because, yeah, like I said, these were, I would say, rookie mistakes as far as a production and texture point of view goes. But at the same time, he was such at the next level as far as composition and just arrangements. So basically, I brought this to the table, and he brought his composition on the table, and basically his ability to use melodies and just being really good at sound design in general also, since just programming a really good patch, making a really good bass line. Like, he was all talent, that guy. Well, it still is, I think. And and so yeah, we went through it, and we had a really good time making it. And yeah, Memmaker was got a lot of heat. It got not heat, but I mean, it got a lot of friction, and it went really well, really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, the first Memmaker album I listened to was Let There Be Lasers, and then obviously you've got the intro, and then there's just that great 3 tracks of like Doom Ray, Machine, and Drop the Beat all just after each other, and I mean, it's just like the production on them and stuff, it's so tight and it's so well done.
Oh, thanks.
You know, and then the sci-fi thing, was that more Guillaume, or do you have like a sci-fi influence yourself? Because obviously Memmaker, there's quite a big sci-fi influence there.
To be honest, the Let It Be Lasers, at that point Guillaume moved to Denmark, and I lived still in Canada, and he started working with other people when he was there. So I like Let There Be. He was also sitting on Let There Be Lasers for a few years. He couldn't finish it, and when I finally moved to Europe, we just decided to get together and actually finish that album also, like we did the last time. So that's what it is. Like this, when I started working on Let There Be Lasers, most of the tracks were already done, and just some polishing and rearranging maybe a little bit, but it was already in the. I mean, most of the track has been done. What I did mostly was when I was more actively involved, was mostly the first one, How to Enlist in a Robot Uprising. I don't know, have you heard that one or not?
Yeah, I've heard that one. I know, it was just Let There Be Lasers was the first one I'd heard. That's how I kind of got like thinking. But yeah, it's all really good stuff. I mean, it's like, it's that way where it's really kind of energetic and really dancey, but not in the way that annoys me. You know what I mean? Like, it's that way where it's like, you can really, it's interesting and you can tell it's thought about and it's well made, and it's like, for me, it's just like, it's really good dance music.
I think that's exactly what we're going for, so.
I mean, you need that. I mean, the energy is really good. I mean, it's really high energy. And well, there's also like, we should probably, while we're on the topic of this, then Ivardensphere, because obviously you've worked with Ivardensphere as well.
We're just wrapping up the new album right now, actually.
Oh, awesome. So how did you get started with Ivardensphere?
I remember Scott walked to me, I think it was Kinetic 1, the first Kinetic festival in Montreal. He's from Edmonton, the other end of the country, so there was no reason for us to meet ever. And he just started talking to me, and he just started Ivardensphere. Like, he just was, he was a well-established DJ. He really liked the work I did. He really wanted to strike conversation and talk music with me. And, you know, kind of person you hit like it with Guillaume, I just totally hit along with him right away. There's no friction, nothing, just good vibe. And, he was doing his thing for a few years. Jairus from Adversary and I think maybe it was in 2010, we decided to go on tour, and everything was ready to go, but we had no driver. And, something happened, with Scott. I don't even remember what it is. It was something, he was planning to go on tour also on his side, but it didn't work out. And he was like, fuck it, you guys, can I drive for you? Well, I think it was the other way around. We asked him. It was game because he had already the time off, and the deal was we had a lot of we spent months preparing that tour. Everything was ready to go. It was really he came in as a lifesaver, and he played a couple of shows with us. And after that, I think after that, I think 2 years later, I joined the lineup, the live lineup, and did some production. It happened really organically. It just like he made a remix, I made a remix, I think, and then we just bounced ideas, and we just started touring together, and I worked on Epoch. That was the first one. That was in 2011. So maybe the tour was in 2009. It was 2010 maybe. It really was released in 2011. So yeah, I worked on that album. And I've been involved a little bit, not that much, honestly. Like I shouldn't take a lot of credit for any of it. Like it's mostly Scott's baby, and he has other collaborators that do more than I do on the albums.
That's quite, so he has a few different people. That's quite a kind of interesting model as well. You know, you get like different collaboration can really bring something new to something.
Definitely. And he's really a collaborative kind of guy also. That's how he likes to work. And I like to collaborate also, but, I guess it takes me a lot more time to produce. I really take my time, and, I'm not saying that he's doing it fast or anything, but like, I feel like, the pace that he's producing, like the time he's investing in making music, dwarfs the time I spend making music. Like as far as production goes, he's like, at this point, he's light years ahead of me, even though he was just starting when I was already making music for 6 years. Like he's got years on me as far as studio time at this point. And simply because he's the kind of guy that he just likes to work a lot in music. He really enjoys it. Me too, but like, the amount of energy he can put into it, it's concentrated. It's something I can't even match. So that's what it is. So he's going to work on a track on a whole album, and I'll collaborate and send some stuff for a couple of tracks, or finish a track saying, okay, like we need a track to fill in the gap between these songs, and I'll just I'll bounce some ideas, and if it works, if it sticks, it sticks. Honestly, every time I send something, it stuck, so it's never been a problem, and it's not out of. And of course there's some retweeting happening and so on, so.
And there's nothing wrong with, like you were saying, like you take your time a bit. I mean, I'd interviewed Paul Lebos from Control Bleeding, and one of the things I asked him was if you could go back to yourself when you started, what would you say to yourself? And the first thing he said was, slow down, take your time, you know.
That's a good tip.
That was a problem. He said in his younger days he was too kind of focused on just getting stuff out and that, and like he wishes he'd kind of like actually just taken his time and gotten it right with a lot of stuff. So I thought that was quite interesting. Yeah,
I really have a love-hate relationship with deadlines, because if it wasn't for deadlines, I probably wouldn't release anything.
Yeah.
Like it's true. Like, if I don't have a deadline, I'm not gonna do it, and I gotta accept this as part of my person. When I started, I just couldn't stop making music because I was really interested, and I'm still doing the same thing here. But the satisfaction I have at the end is the same as during. So you know, I gotta balance that now. Just give me a deadline and I'll do it. But if I don't have a deadline, like.
It's the same with a lot of things, isn't it? I mean, like, you have time, anything in life, you've got time to do it, and then you're like, I've got plenty of time, and you just put it off, and then, like, a day before it, you're like, oh, shit.
It's, if I don't have I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone and do something a bit different right now, and I'm realizing I just thought about it, and I realized that I've been telling this to myself for 3 years now. Maybe I should, self-impose a deadline somewhere.
So, I know that as well, like, you had stuff out on sort of European record labels and things like that, and as I believe you moved to Europe, didn't you, Yann?
Yeah, I live in the Netherlands now.
Oh, cool, awesome. How do you think that's different, do you think, for the kind of music you do? Like, there's kind of more of a kind of scene around that part of Europe, or was it just something you wanted to do to move to Europe?
I really don't want to shit on Canada, but no, this is it. Like the people that I work with in Canada are the most dedicated people there is. But like, there's what 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 cities that are big enough to support for me to show up, and there's more than 5 people in the room. You know? So yeah, sure. There's like the festivals, or Kinetic was pretty successful. its demise has nothing to do with its success. Terminus seems to be working well. I've never been there actually, but it seems to be doing pretty good. Seems like punctual events seem to be doing pretty good still. And it's pretty popular. It's working. It's not bad, but you got to. The scale is really smaller, and the distances are so big. It's and also the culture and the relationship people have with music is very different, I think, in Europe. But I've been touring Europe since 2001, so I've known this all along, and I've always wanted to live in Europe. So just for that, basically, because I always know, and I was completely vindicated when I moved here. But like, it's so much easier to organize shows and get things happening. I've been pretty busy doing shows since I moved here, and I never actually sought out anyone to make a show. So since I moved here, it's all came to me. And if I'd been in Canada, I would practically need to organize everything myself. So, and yeah, just sometimes it works out, but like more often than not, there's no one that shows up basically because reasons. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it works really well, but it's like throwing the dice basically, and just too many variables and not enough people basically is the main thing. So yeah, there's just more people. It's a critical mass basically. There's just so many more people. It's so much easier to travel between cities.
Much smaller area.
Sorry?
Much smaller area. Yeah, I've been to Canada and it's huge.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I want to catch a show, like when I was in Canada last, I did a DJ set in my hometown in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. It was pretty packed, but it's a bar the size basically of somebody's living room. It was fun. It was great. Actually, I had a super good time. And after that, we did a show in Montreal, which went really well. And then we did a show in Toronto, which also went pretty good. The show in Montreal went exceptionally well. The one in Toronto was completely acceptable. We had a really good turnout. But like the amount of driving involved in this is a 3-day thing, and we were the drive between Montreal and Toronto is about 6-7 hours if you think the stops. Mm-hmm. So then back to Ottawa, that was another 5 hours right there. So that's and.
So that makes you think of a joke. Actually, the joke is about an American and Englishman, but for our purposes, Yann, I'll make it about a Canadian and a Scotsman. And it's the difference between the Canadian and the Scotsman is that the Canadian thinks that 100 years is a long time, and the Scotsman thinks that 100 miles is a long distance.
I think you nailed it. Exactly. But yeah. But this is the reality of doing shows in Canada, basically. And, doing shows in the US, that's just completely, as a Canadian, it's bunkers. Like, I need visas, it's so expensive, like, you cannot break even. Unless it's a big tour, there's a bunch of bands involved, and there's, guilds, involved of, musician guilds that will do some of the paperwork for you. If you have a lawyer, you need a lawyer. That's usually, given by a guild. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's not reasonable. It used to be reasonable, maybe, during the Bush administration.
Not many people say things were reasonable during the Bush administration.
Yeah. But it just got crazier and crazier. And now with the new political climate, like I hear stories of basically now customs officers who are already extremely zealot in a lot of ways. Not all of them, but of course, like you hear just crazy stories about people getting just cooked for hours for nothing, basically. Mm. And it's getting more extreme with the current climate. So, I mean, it's a huge headache. I was supposed to tour with Ivardensphere last summer, a year ago, in the US. We did everything by the book. I bought plane tickets to get from Europe to the US. And the visas are really strict. You need to say where you're coming from, what's your address. Like, there's pages and pages and pages, and like no mistake allowed. And it's a booking agency that did it for us. And my plane ticket was we did everything respecting the timelines, right? Mm-hmm. And I was supposed to leave one day, and I got the visas 2 days later. so I missed the plane completely. And that's not refundable because that's not a good reason. You need to have your documents ready before you travel. It's stated very clearly with any insurance or plane tickets. So I was looking to get another flight, and last minute flights are not really the best, but it was so much work to organize. Like I felt really bad about the whole thing. But then I looked at the visa, and there was all these mistakes. Like they put that was not my address on it. There was a few spelling mistakes. It said that I was going to arrive from Canada, but I was flying in Boston, I think. Like there's all these mistakes, and I'm like, hey, all I need is like somebody with a bad mustache, and I'm fucked, basically. So.
No, it's interesting because a band that will remain nameless for the purposes of this story that I know that are an American band, they had a few gigs booked up in Canada. So they're American, they're going up to Canada, and because of a band they'd known that had ran into so much trouble at the border because of work permits and all this just to play two gigs, like they had to do this incognito. Hence why they're remaining nameless. Like they had to sort of they couldn't go over with all their gear and stuff like that. They had to sort of rent stuff when they were over and stuff like that. And I mean, it's just driving over a border, but they were having these problems, like work permits and all this other nonsense to play two gigs.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Canada though, in the last years have laxed a lot with bands, but America really tightened it up. I can't really give you the details because I never had to organize anything to go in Canada since I still have a Canadian passport. But there was a time where I had to I don't even remember what it is. Everything was by the book. Everything was good. I went to I think I was flying into Texas, and the customs in the U.S. customs are in Canada when you're taking an airport. If your flight is bound to the U.S. from Canada, there's U.S. customs there to save a lot of trouble, basically. So we did. So I went there, and I flew in. Basically, I cleared the customs, and I flew into I think it was Dallas, might be something else. And once I arrived, for whatever reason, they got me on the side, and they went through my email.
Really?
Yeah, email. That was maybe 2008, I think. I would say 2008. I was on Google, they just, Gmail, and they just okay, give us your password or you're not getting through, basically. This is exactly what they said. And they just did that in the same room as I was, and they just scrolled through all my emails.
That's crazy.
They just looked at everything. And, I had a laptop. They looked through everything on my laptop, and it was not even a situation. I could have said no, but if you say no, you're just refused, basically. So
yeah, they assume you're hiding something.
you have a choice, but you don't have a choice, basically. So it's one of those fake choices. I'm after that, I was like, well, I can't even fucking. It's it's a shitty deal. Going through the border is a shitty deal. And a lot of people are starting to talk about it. I've noticed that South by Southwest, there was with the band Soviet, I think, got in trouble and their story got published everywhere and people were like, oh my God. But the fact is, this is reality and it's not new from the Trump administration. It's been like that for over a decade now. And there's nothing special about that story. It's not even shocking to me, that story. This story is basically, well, you tried to sneak through the border and you got caught because you didn't do a good job at it. And they just followed the instructions of their record label, actually, according to what they said, which I completely believe because not everybody's well informed. And, and shit happened. But yeah, this happens all the time.
Even the times I've gone to America, I mean, the queue when you get in, you have to fill out a form and all that in the plane. The queue when you get in is just it's nuts, and then you're talking to these immigration people and I'm kind of, they like to make jokes and things like that, but they don't. The immigration officials I have met do not appreciate humour. Or the customs officials.
I'm sure that behind those dead eyes, there's jokes. But
it's just trying to find them.
Yeah, but no, it's the state of it is terrible. It's not something. It's just last year when I tried to go through the border, the fact that I had any mistake on I got it late. I knew I smelled a fish the whole time, and I was not willing to go through the border and being kicked out, spend a day in jail until I had a plane, and then handcuffed and put in a plane on the way back. I did not want to do that. I know some people it happened to, no names, but like I know some crazy stories about like just insanity over bullshit like this. So I'm not game.
So a lot of the thing I've been asking people in the show is about like non-musical influences. So is there any kind of big non-musical influences on you?
Well, I come from a more visual arts background. I like landscapes, the textures, and I like to translate that into music actually. So I think that's one of the main things. Like I like to keep music as subjective as possible when I make it also.
Because I was thinking about like you said there like landscapes and stuff like that, and that's how when I first started to get into as like when I was quite young, when I started to get into sort of ambient music and things like that, I started listening to like Brian Eno and stuff like that, and what I was so interested in was that whole thing about how like it was like, you know, you listen to some music and it's like verse, chorus, verse, and it's blah, blah, blah. But then sometimes you can be outside somewhere like in nature and we look at a landscape and like listen to something like even like take his Dunwich Beach 1960 or Lizard Point or something like that. You know, like I'm just Brian, you know, posting a little bit here, but like that kind of thing. And it's like you hear this music and you're outside maybe in your headphones and it's like, it's almost like the music is sort of describing the landscape that you're looking at, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's the old saying. This music is a soundtrack for the movie in my head.
Yeah, yeah, we all have it, don't we?
Mm-hmm. But that's what I'm going for actually. So, I would say more in your original question where you asked me the conceptualization of isolation in the music. Well, it's more a theme that I use on Iszoloscope, not with other projects, I would say, but mostly Iszoloscope. It's more a theme than anything. Stick to these aesthetics really, and it's when you're in the subjective world, it's really hard to put easy words without getting ready for it, and it's mostly bullshit anyways because it is subjective, and you're trying to be not subjective about something. It's lost in the details, I think. So did I make any sense?
No, totally, because because kind of what I'm getting is like people who are like musicians and that. I know this as well. I'm speaking for me, but obviously other people I know as well, like friends of mine and stuff, I've had these conversations with. Like sometimes it's like it's easier to express yourself through sound than actual words sometimes, and I think that's what differentiates musicians from writers in a way.
Yeah, you touch a good point there because I think it's you can stay subjective and have something make sounds that mirror your mood without having to put words in it is really, I think it's really therapeutic, and you don't need to explain. Basically, this is one of the main thing. This is one of the main thing also that I realized when I started making music and I was still doing visual arts. When I did visual arts, it was expected me to explain to it, and everybody seemed to have an opinion about what I was making when I was making visual arts. And you know, when you just spend 20 hours, 40 hours on a piece, and somebody says something as inane as, "Oh, that reminds me of the X-Files," I'm like, "Look, I don't need your shit." Like, but when you make music, nobody has like. Of course, you can put something on the internet and get shit posted. Like somebody just send hate to you, but it's always for some reason with music you dodge completely people's like people will say, "Oh, it will remind me this or that musically," and it's never gonna be a direct line unless you're basically doing a cover band.
Yeah. Right.
But if you're doing something just slightly different from any other thing, it's a bit of this genre, and you can have people fighting over what genre they're listening to because they have nothing better to do. But yeah, you don't have anybody sitting down and telling you what you're doing. Basically, when you make music, you can't. They just can't, and that's a good. Again, I thought that was very therapeutic and very relaxing in contrast to having to justify whatever I was doing when I was doing visual arts. I think this is the main reason I completely disconnect from visual arts. When I was right out of high school, I went to the Ottawa School of Arts. I stayed there for I think 3 months. It was the worst 3 months. I was just taking a night class like 3 days a week, and it was like wow. I'm getting frustrated just thinking about it. Like it was a really you really have the opinion and the judgment of people. But as soon as I got into music, especially in the experimental scene in Ottawa, suddenly nobody had any opinion, or I liked it or I don't like it, and that was a bit like the Jimi Hendrix. Like, there's only two types of music you like and music you don't like.
Yeah.
And that I think it resonated really well. Like, it's like, and that just resonated with me. And if you're making music that somebody does not enjoy, they will just not listen to it. They'll listen to it for a bit, and then either you lose them, either you captivate them, and it becomes a really nice sharing experience instead of a confronting experience. I would say, like watching a piece of visual arts. I think that's the main difference.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and there's that whole thing of like constraint and stuff as well. And even when I was in school, what I would call secondary school, you would call high school, like I remember, having...
It's secondary school in Canada also.
Oh, is it? No, like, so I had, like, did music class and stuff like that, and the funny thing was I had it kind of both ways, because I had this way where when I was quite young, I was put in piano lessons that was very rigid and structured, and I couldn't do it. I learned it, but I didn't like it, and it wasn't enjoyable to me. But on the other side, my dad was a musician, he played in bands and things, kind of folk music, that kind of thing. But he taught me like a few basic chords. He actually taught me Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan, and then said, I'll help you if you need it, but you should learn yourself, because he taught himself. And his kind of philosophy was that if you teach yourself, you develop your own style, and then you're not sort of constrained by these rules that are drilled into you over and over again. So then I'd learned to play guitar when I was like 7, so then it kind of came from there. And then when I got into like a formal music class in secondary school, it was it was all these kind of rules and structure, and I just didn't feel I didn't feel creative to me. It felt like I was just reproducing sound to pass exams, and that really pissed me off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. This is the main reasons I really got into experimental music. Is my first thing I wanted to do when I started to make music is I wanted to find my own sound. I wanted to put it bluntly, I wanted to know what I sounded like as a person musically. It took me a while it didn't take me long to find it either. The basics, like I wanted to see what my extremes are, what my comfort zones are, how far from my comfort zone I can work without straining, and I would say finding my extended comfort zone and my comfort zone in music creation, because I think it's also important. A lot of people, like I'm saying, like right now I'm trying to get out of this a little bit of the pattern, but then again, it becomes more of a chore. Like for me, it has to flow naturally, and that's very important. So I was really into finding my own sound when I started, and that was really important for me. In fact, anybody who was giving me any feedback production wise, first of all, they were all assholes. So I didn't even like, it's true. Like everybody, when I started making music, either people, shared the experience with me, or, they just projected their insecurities on me. Or they just were telling me straight off the bat they were not interested, and I'm completely fine with that. But I realized, like, that's a great divider, actually, finding out, like, especially back then, I was not really good with people, so it's a really good divider. Like, okay, well, I don't want to invest energy on this person because that person has an opinion about something that should not have opinion about, or just do like it or not like it. What do you not like about it? Or what do you like about it? That's as far as you can go. But honestly, like, no names here, but like one of the first shows I ever did, somebody walked to me and basically, look, you need to sound like Depeche Mode. I remember somebody telling me that. I remember his face. It was the most genuine, I want to help you face I've ever seen in my life. and that was the most creatively bad advice I ever had in my life. It was like, if I think of a bad advice, I was maybe 21 when I heard that advice, but I just remember every time I think of the word bad advice in my head, I see his face telling me this.
Almost like you could open a dictionary and look up bad advice and
yeah, exactly.
big picture.
It's an illustration of his face, mouth open, explaining this to me. Right? And it was coming from a totally nice place, but it was just like, no, that's not what I'm into. Like, I'm really not into that. Like, it's just not what I want to do, man. Yeah, because I was really into exploring at the time, so I still am. I still need to do some exploring. I still need to find something new. In order to create a track, especially when I work with Iszoloscope, I need to have a sound that I've never had before in the track or something. I need to go somewhere and have the sound that really resonates with me, and then I can build around it. But every other sound in the track will be made in relation texturally to that track, to that sound, that original sound. And more often than not, the track finishes and that original sound is long gone. Not always, but sometimes it is, and it's become another thing altogether, and that's completely fine also. But yeah, it has to be for me, at least in my process, it has to be a natural flow from something that resonates with me to an entire track. So.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I know as well about that, like, that sound being gone. I mentioned this before, but, like, I'll mention it again. It's that kind of thing where, I don't know if you know, like, you see those Buddhist monks and they make those intricate, beautiful sand mandalas, and it takes them months and months, and it's all this different colour sand, they're beautiful, and then they just rub it out, and then it's gone, you know. And sometimes when you create sounds, and then, you know, I'm never going to reproduce that, but you've recorded it, and it's kind of like that, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. There's something really beautiful about that, actually. The sand mandala, is actually, that's a really good example of first of all, the ever-changing nature of life, but also, like, the creative process. It's really a good thing about, to keep in mind in the creative process. Because it's not the end result, it's the time and the energy spent doing it, basically. That's, celebrated in that,
yeah, it's the whole process, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. The end result is so inconsequential to what they did that they just brush it off afterwards.
And I'm glad you didn't start sounding like Depeche Mode.
It was also at the time, like, when did you really get into this kind of music?
Right, so, like, I was originally into rock music and that in the 90s when I was a child, so it probably would have been the early 2000s when I was a teenager that I started to get into this kind of thing.
Yeah. About 5 years before that period, like end of the 90s, I think it was like, there was a really interesting explosion in that kind of music, especially what Metropolis record was doing and, what was going on in North America, I think. You had all these bands that made, really aggressive dance music, especially also, the Invisible record people in Metropolis. And it was really, everybody was doing their own thing. But then came, A-pop and VNV Nation. And then suddenly these guys just nailed something really on the head really well. And I know this for a fact from many people that were in the music business at the time doing this kind of stuff. Suddenly in their contracts from, I won't name a record label here or a band, but suddenly in their contracts, they had a statement that said, okay, now you need to sound like VNV Nation or A-pop, and no discussion. Really? Yeah, absolutely. Oh. And then suddenly in early 2000s, like really early 2000, there's all these bands that were making these really interesting things that just stopped doing anything, and they started sounding really off and weird. And I'm not saying that that's what happened, but that's definitely a huge factor, because I know some record labels demanded this from their bands because these bands were selling so much more. That was before the time of MP3s. So, selling CDs was still a big business at the time. And we're talking like between making a few tens of $1,000s versus making $100,000 was enough for record labels to be like, at the time, like, look, great, but fuck off. You better make me some money, you know?
Yeah.
And, there was a drop in the quality at the time, I think. And, I really don't want to put anyone or anything on the spot, but I remember at one point, I went to the record store and I listened to everything that was new that month, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? Suddenly everything, like, there was no more flavor. There was nothing that was, wow, that's completely different. But at the same time, I think that was exactly the same month that I started listening to stuff on Anzen Records. So it came as a bit of a providence, and also Hans Record. That's exactly when I went to something else completely. And I think that was wholesome in that. As far as rhythmic stuff goes, of course, it was still like really ambient stuff. And I was not aware. I think it was, Shockfront came up exactly the same month that I was asking myself what the fuck is going on with this stuff. And then, yeah, so I listened to Shockfront from Converter, and that thing was like light years ahead of anything with that kind of aesthetics. I've heard Sonar before. I was really into Merzbow also, but it was done so creatively with ambiences mixed together, and the structures were so weird and out there. I don't know if you heard that album recently, Shockfront.
I've not heard it in a while. I've heard it, but not for a while.
Yeah, there's like that album just ages really well. I think it ages better than the stuff he did subsequently. Simply because I think at that point he had the sound nailed down, and he was going, okay, this is working, I'm going to do this. Then he stopped for that exactly that reason, I think. But that album of like, it was really like, I'm looking for something sound, and it was all over the place, but it had a very consistent aesthetic at the same time, which made it extremely interesting and really dark also, which I really, really liked and appreciated. But yeah. Exactly that month that album came out, like everything else that I would go for on the rhythmic side, on more dance side, suddenly I was blown away how bad it was suddenly. Like, and it was a really quick switch. And, and then I started to listen almost only to that kind of, stuff rhythmically.
That's really interesting, because I really didn't know about like those clauses and that you were talking about, and, kind of brings me to something I was interested in, like, because obviously, like, now the record industry it's kind of flipped, say, like, over the last little while, because we went from like a buying economy to more of a streaming economy and things like that. And obviously now it's easier. I mean, you can get your music on SoundCloud and like not only that stuff, but even on Spotify and Apple, it's easy to do. You can get a distribution company to do that for you, which means it's easier to do, but then there is more noise out there. I mean, do you have any kind of thoughts on where the music industry sort of is just now?
It's changing so much that whenever I have an opinion, it's outdated. Like, I had an opinion 10 years ago, and I think that opinion was really good, and then that opinion was absolutely not good anymore, like maybe 3 years later. And then I had another opinion, and by the time it solidified, I was way off, and I don't even know anymore. I honestly, at this point, I just decided that I was going to do my thing. And see what happens.
Yeah, just see how it goes.
Because like, I can't keep up. I really can't keep up. I think somebody that would start making music right now would have a better view of what's going on, but I'm completely aware that view is going to be outdated in 3 to 5 years. Or not. It might just stabilize at one point, because we might be just in a flux at this point. But honestly, you can just do your thing, make relations. That's exactly how it worked before anyways. A lot of people are saying that it was all about the distribution and so on, but on the artist side, you needed to know people. You needed to network. You needed to know who did what. Not in the sense of I can name drop, but more in the sense that, you can communicate with people that are like-minded artistically, and it comes really naturally, even to awkward teenagers, basically, I think. There's nothing more invigorating, I think, than having somebody that's just an awkward teenager contacting me and asking me objective questions about production and how I do things, basically. But very specific stuff. Like when it's just like, how do I start? I don't even know what to say. But if it's like, okay, how do you do this specifically, completely out of the blue? That's the kind of questions I asked when I went on festivals the first times, or when I did shows, or when I met people for the first time at concerts. And I think I clicked with a lot of artists also like that, and I still have relationships with them maybe 15 years later, 20 almost, based on that, basically. Because if you start talking shop to someone, it's just the dynamic is completely different, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's never going to change. What's going to change is just distribution and the relationship between the consumer and the product, and that's the least important part of making music. it is important, the fact that this is the income of a lot of people, but I've came to accept that I'm never going to make a living out of making music a long time ago, and now I'm completely comfortable with that. So as soon as I was comfortable with that, like, I let a lot of things go, honestly. It was really very liberating.
Funny you say, like, if someone asks you how do I start, that's like saying, like, how long's a piece of string? Do you know what I mean? Like, it depends. Yeah. It depends on you and all the rest of it. But yeah, and I'm conscious of the time here, and so as we start to wrap up, I want to ask, like, what have you got upcoming? Is there anything you'd like to plug and talk to us about what the future is?
Yeah, the new album from Ivardensphere we're wrapping up. Like, we're like just, I think the deadline that we need to send all the masters is going to be later this week, but it should be on in in the following months. I'm really happy with what we got done, and I think it's going to be great. I haven't heard the finished product yet, but it's like, so far it sounds amazing. I'm really happy with it. As far as Iszoloscope, I got a collaboration coming up. I haven't started it, honestly. I'm supposed to start it next week. Since I haven't started or I haven't even gone into it, I'm not even going to announce who is it, where it's going, because just dead in the water. It might be dead in the water in a week from now, so I don't. But once that's done, I'm going to start working on the next album. It's a bit overdue at this point anyways, so, and, the next Iszoloscope album. So we'll see where we go with that, basically. But, but next is going to be an Iszoloscope EP or album. Maybe, EP for sure before the end of the year. The album, probably first quarter of next year, if everything goes well. Like I said, it's also something I would, a bit out of my comfort zone. I want to start working on something that just doesn't sound like Iszoloscope. That's just structurally and, moodily, I was thinking of doing something ambient, but I keep changing my mind.
Oh, do you ever have that way where sometimes you have like something in mind when you're going to do something? You've got like a sound in mind, you're thinking about it, even formulating it in your head, and then you actually go to do it, and it doesn't sound anything like that. But
it's like that mandala again. Like, you basically work on something and it's gone. It's something else, and it doesn't really matter. And but yeah, exactly. I haven't organized my thoughts in a way that's productive into something else yet. And it's been a little while though, so I don't know. Let me just drop it all together. I don't know.
Oh, don't do that. Keep going.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Well, listen, Yann, this has been great. It's been a really good conversation. I very much enjoyed it. I'd like to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Vlad. Really appreciate it.
My thanks again to Yann for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation. So to finish, we're going to listen to some Iszoloscope. So from the False Vacuum album, this is Relevance Outside Logic.